If you're looking for a fun European campaign, look no further than Spain. It's on the decline, right? So the Spanish have been declining for a little while. If you play as any of the big dogs, I find there's too much to manage. There's not as much room to maneuver. As Spain, you can still influence politics over here, but you have a clear aim to try and reconquer back the old Spanish Empire. Spain at this point has, well, very little to its name, if anything. It maintains Cuba and I think also the Philippines. But aside from that, it is a shell of its former self. So it can be a lot of fun to aim to do that. You can also form Iberia and become an empire yourself. So yeah, to start off the list, something very basic, and later on down the line, we're going to have more things with different flavour and different ways of playing. But if you're looking for a European nation, this is my first pick. Because yeah, if you're playing as France or Austria, you kind of have to do too much. Whereas Spain, you just focus on building up, and then you can sweep through Europe like the Spanish once did. Also, in terms of natural resources, you have everything that you need to build a modern economy. The main things you need are coal and iron, and also wood. You have all of those things. On top of that, you also have sulfur and lead, which are very good for explosive industries, which means your armies are going to be second to none. We also have this, which gives iron mines output and coal mines output. So you're doing all right. For example, Valencia, if you've ever seen any of my Tunis campaigns, I always run straight for Valencia because Valencia has coal, iron, lead, and also logging camps. It's quite good. So you have a decently sized population as well, and your laws are quite favorable. You still have a little bit to go to where potentially you want to be. You're still a monarchy, oligarchy. You can stay conservative if you want, but if you want to go more liberal, that's also possible. You also have no colonial affairs, and you can shift that to colonial exploitation and get back on the saddle again when it comes to colonization. If you're looking for a harder challenge, Persia is there for you. A similar sort of idea behind me picking Spain. With Persia, given the lack of flavor in the game, and there is some flavor nowadays, which is very good, but given the lack of flavor for a lot of nations, it's important that you sort of get into to enjoy a campaign and not just for it not to just be a spreadsheet simulator. It's important you get into the idea of like past identity, right? And Persia is wonderful for that because you have a clear aim, and that is to conquer back the Persian Empire from the upstart Ottomans. In terms of resources, you have coal and iron and logging camps, so you're not starving for resources right at the start. You also have a decent population. 6 million isn't terrible. You are the 22nd most populous nation of all time, as well as having the ability to head east. The reason that's important is that you can expand your silk and dye plantations. Although if you want to play a tall Persia, you can do the exact same thing. I mean, look at this. Oh, plus 20% dye plantations output. If you are playing as a European nation, if you want to, for example, Spain, we'll take Spain. You want to expand your textile industries, which is quite an important one. You need dyes and silk, something that you need to get from the east, whereas we have it already over here. So Persia basically has everything apart from maybe the population side of things to turn into a great power very, very quickly. It's a lot of fun to do so because you're currently an unrecognized regional power. But you do have a very slightly better start in terms of your laws. So you do still need to get out of traditionalism as soon as possible. You used to think start with interventionism, but now you don't. Speaking of a fight to liberalize, we have the Japanese shogunate. Very unique because you start with 30 million people, very useful. Also the rank 14th unrecognized major power, but you are isolationist. This to me is the best way to learn the game if you're a beginner. And the reason for that is because anything that you do affects your economy. This market tab right now, you don't import, you don't export, you have to produce everything yourself and stay isolationist. Well, I mean, you don't have to. And in fact, fighting off an incredibly strong shogunate faction is really difficult. There aren't exactly liberal factions in Japan at this point. Plus, you have Hokkaido. Hokkaido has everything. It has lead, it has coal, it has iron, it has sulfur, logging camps, whaling stations. That's one of the best provinces in the game. You do have a little bit of flavor with occasional journal entries coming in. And you can start to, I guess, roleplay as the Japanese as they try to build a bit more of an empire. It's sort of at this time the Japanese would start over the next 100 years to rapidly modernize and decide that, hey, you know that thing that the Europeans do in terms of imperial conquest? I want some of that. So it's a good time to try and manage all of that. You start off with a large army. Obviously, it's all irregular infantry, but still enough to take on some of these regions. The only issue you're going to have as Japan is that these things aren't endless in terms of your resources. You start with enough to get you cracking for sure. But to really unlock your economy, you're definitely going to want to liberalize or conquer. Staying isolationist in Japan is an option. It limits you, but it is an option. But going away from isolationism in Japan, like I said, has one of the most in-depth governmental struggles that you're going to have in the game. Plus, I know half of you are weebs, so you're going to love that sort of thing. Okay, staying in the same region, Dai Nam is another one. So Vietnam is a great nation to play as. Again, you have a decent population size with a lot of smaller states to go up. So I like to play this as like an imperialist one instead of focusing on internal things. You do have coal and iron and such available, so you can build a modern industry, but as well as having stuff like dye and silk. One thing you might note, though, is an 11% literacy rate, which is terrible. So I like to, instead of trying to liberalize, I like trying to smash into Siam, which are, I think, a little bit stronger at the start of the game. We're roughly the same. We're a little bit strong, actually. I think they have a better starting position. But anyway, the size of our nation means that we can build a modern economy quite quickly, modernize quite quickly, and then start spamming out some education in terms of universities and trying to get our laws going. We do have the same sort of law struggles that Persia and Japan will go through, although we do have an open economy at least. And then you can start sweeping west into the British East India Company and try and take on the British Empire. It's very, very hard. Or even the Chinese. That's my favorite thing to do, to be honest. That's the most fun thing. Unite Southeast Asia and then head north into the Qing and try and use technological superiority to compensate for a lack of arms. But as of right now, no possible nation formation, so a lot of it comes from your own ideas. Russia can form a nation. And you might think, Laith, how? There's no possible country formations. And I'm talking about the USSR. So the reason I'll pick Russia as one of the most fun campaigns is because you can go through this journey of communism, right? You have to play for a little bit. You do start as a great power, but you're not exactly, how to describe this, a competent great power. It's your population size that makes you a great power. You have double the population of France and almost about 4 times that of Prussia. So you're pretty well placed to start interfering in Prussian, Austrian politics with their whole great game thing going on over there. But with Russia, my personal advice is to slowly industrialize and then run for communism and then go through and not conquer territory, but create loads of little protectorates and sort of start creating the Warsaw Pact a little bit earlier. Like, trust me, that's so much fun. Once you start imposing that as an aim to try and, like, you versus the world, trying to convert the world to communism, the game takes on a new shape that I think is unparalleled in any other gameplay loop. If you're playing as somewhere, for example, as France, it's just not the same. I mean, I did a whole thing as playing as Napoleon, which was fun. Or like Britain, to this day, Britain's my least played nation. Like on par with other tiny states. It's just not fun to me. Because there's no point, if that makes sense. Britain's already on top. It's already at its peak. Whereas Russia, you can start to modernize and you can start to create that whole like communist utopia. Which is, yeah, it's great fun. And your population base makes that a real possibility. It's not particularly tricky either, to be honest. This is one of the easier campaigns I have on this list. Because, I don't know, something doesn't need to be hard for it to be fun. Steamrolling, creating communist states and communist puppets is just great. However, if you are looking for a tricky campaign, then look no further than Mexico. Mexico starts out at war with Texas, a war that, well, if you lose this war, just, I guess, restart, man, and take a long, hard thought about how you play this game. But still, you take out Texas, you have a little bit of colonial rush, and then you've got to face the big dog of the USA. They have, I mean, you've got 4 million GDP to their almost 20 million. So 5 times your GDP. Why do they only have... What the hell? What's wrong with the United States of America? Why do they have 11 battalions? Okay, sure. Anyway, Mexico also has gold, which is great because that's going to be most of your budget going forward. You have the basics of coal, iron, and logging camps, so you don't need to be rushing around trying to claim those. But again, the gold side of things is pretty good, and that's what's going to make the difference as you rush to try and take on the United States. It's cool because you have that constant threat. If the United States decides they want to kill you, they kill you. So you, in the meantime, need to do whatever you can to stop that from happening. If I show you the USA, they have a whole manifest destiny thing they're going to do. Their literacy is 43%. The Mexican literacy currently sitting at 20%, which means that your tech, you haven't even researched the Laith yet. So you're definitely behind, and you have some way to get back. But if you do want to become an imperialist state, South America, and I guess South Africa if you want to. South America is your plaything, all to try and build up to the final boss of the United States of America. If you leave it too long, the USA will kill you. They will crush you. They will destroy you. They have more population, a much better GDP, and a much better science division tech than you do. So you need to be concerned about that. For me, I lose interest in this playthrough once I have destroyed the USA, but becoming what could have been and becoming sort of the modern, what the USA is in the modern day as Mexico is quite fun. Again, building up that little storyline between the two of them. But if you're not looking to create a storyline and instead want to steamroll, welcome to the Great Qing. You start out with 365 million people. No one's even close to you in GDP. No one's even close to you in population. But what you're lacking in is you've got this fragile unity thing, but which, by the way, it just doesn't happen. It just, as a player, this never happens. It just doesn't. You do have some of these things like Chinese missions and also Heavenly Kingdom. So there is a degree of flavor here. Once you get all of this under control and start to develop as a nation, there is nothing anyone can do to stop you. Resources abundant, industry abundant, agriculture abundant. I mean, you can make so much money from taxes alone. Unrealized taxes is costing you 715,000. You would make a profit of 700k if you just do that. So increasing your bureaucracy is a massive priority, and then after that, you just steamroll. There's nothing anyone could do to stop you. It's China. There's too much. It does become dull very quickly, I will warn you. It does become very, very dull, because you just go, okay, conquer state, cool, done. But fighting off the Europeans and trying to take back places like Macau is it's pretty cool. What I like to do is just invade Europe and do a reverse and take treaty ports in every single one of their states. But again, this is not, for me at least, a long-term campaign. It's just you've got Netflix on one monitor, you just fancy messing around for a little while. Qing is the best one. It's very, very forgiving as a state, which is in direct contrast to Sokoto. Sokoto starts out with a respectable 5 million population, 2.5 million GDP, a terrible 8.8% in terms of literacy rate. I'm glad they tweaked the literacy rates, because it used to happen that Tunis had a lower literacy rate than like the unincorporated states, which is kind of embarrassing for Tunis, but we move. Anyway, terrible in terms of this. But then also you have what we had with the Japanese, and isolationism is the order of the day with a very hard, long path to liberalizing. But you are the strongest in your area. So when you play Sokoto, your aim should be to kick out the Europeans, always. And attacking too much into these areas is going to bring nations like Denmark against you, who will crush you, despite the fact that you do have 70 battalions ready to fight. What you can do is run around creating little tributary states, and forcing people to submit to you. That's always good. Or just conquer them directly, at which point you start colonizing Africa yourself. Getting a coastline is very important, because in terms of natural resources, you do have iron and coal, but it's not going to be too much, especially with the logging camps. That's not going to sustain you long term. You will hit your cap. And if you want to start developing into a state with silk, you don't have that, but you do have dyes. So you do have a leg up on the Europeans. Damn, that's a lot of dyes. So it's a fun state because you have initial military expansion that is unchecked by anyone else around you until you hit the Europeans, which is an enemy that you can't just throw your troops at. You need to start developing from there. Also quite a good beginner nation, again, for the isolation purposes. So when I play Sokoto, I've played 3 times now, actually, which is, I don't think I've done that for any other nation. Apart from Tunis. But the reason I've done that is because it's fun each time. You have short-term aims of consolidating your area, because taking these areas and then bringing them under your control gives you a lot more population. A lot of people live here. You can double your population. Ashanti has 1 million. Dahomey down here, and so another 400k. I think this one's 1 million. Yeah, 1.5 million. So there's a lot of territory you can take that's going to give you a lot of population to rival that of the big dogs down here. And generally adopt the mantle of the protector of Africa against the Europeans. A lot of fun. Speaking of protecting against the Europeans, dude, these segues are so good. We have the Sikh Empire. The Sikh Empire are quite unique, but they have a significant population, terrible literacy, so similar to Sokoto, but a little bit more advanced in terms of what they have going on. They still have serfdom, so they have a long way to go, but at least they're not isolationist. Taking out Sind early is the path to success here, because then you just have access to a port and you can start selling. What can you sell? I'm glad you asked. You have every resource. Opium, silk. Look how many silk. You have 568 silk plantations. That's ridiculous. The only issue you're going to have is that in terms of natural resources, you have very little. You don't have any steel. So you've got a lot of agriculture, cash crops and that sort of thing, but you don't have steel. There's some over here in Kalat, and I think there's some in Afghanistan. Yeah. So you do need to have those early invasions, unite this region, to then try and stand up to the British East India Company, who are going to be your bogeyman for the day, and Britain in general. You are very weak to them at the start, even though you have a larger army, and you are an unrecognized major power. You do have 96 battalions. Don't even have a cotton gin. That's kind of sad. So yeah, conquering these areas, again, you've got this idea of short, medium, long-term aims. Short-term aims get natural resources in terms of iron checked off the list, which is going to help you with your medium-term aims, develop as a nation and industrialize, get a port and start selling to the world, and then long-term aims of conquering India and kicking the British out. So the reason I prefer this campaign to other ones like Spain, which has a lofty long-term aim of conquer back your empire. This one has short, medium, long-term, same as Sokoto, where you have clear, defined goals at each stage that help you with the next stage. This is a lot of fun. It's a shame to me that this doesn't have any flavor, because I think this could be one of the most fun nations in Victoria 3. It is to me already now, but could be the best one given a little bit of love. And if you want to see what flavor does to make a game fun, look no further than Brazil and Bolivia. Brazil has just been hit with the new update, so you have a lot of stuff here. I like this, the Magnanimous Monarch. Basically, it runs on the historical idea that Pedro, I can't even pronounce it, de Bragança, I don't... Anyway, so he wants to maintain democratic rule and protect civil liberties afforded by the Constitution, but you do, like such as ending slavery, but you do have conservative elements that don't want that. What happens here, if you get this to 0, then you get a conservative republic that overthrows him. So you've got some nice internal battles, which is fantastic, because that's something that Victoria 3 has generally been missing. The internal game is kind of dull. This makes it quite fun. And then you have slavery, where you can start messing around with these buttons over here to agree with the Brits, according to the deal you signed 10 years ago, that slavery should be banned. It goes one step further, and we have integrating the Brazilian nation, which gives us some assimilation and migration attraction. And otherwise, we fail nation building, because Brazil's a very disunified state. But if we click these buttons, we can integrate all of these slots, but we need to have a national hero in each of those places. Like I said, the internal game is a lot of fun, and it stops what you might like. Okay, like I said, Measure with Qing, nice, like, flurry to your aim, but you watch Netflix on the second monitor. It's like what I call a Netflix chill game. This one is not. You are trying to constantly manage your internal policies, but it's not dull. You have favorable starting, for example, taxation laws, and you do, well, you're not traditionalism, which is just, thank God, you know? But navigating the journal entries are engaging, and they're fun, and they feel satisfying to do, and, well, you start at war, which is always going to be a bonus for me. You have a large population, and you can play with the whole migration attraction mechanics to try and bring as many people over then sort of compete with the USA. Because at this time, it was like Brazil, Argentina, and the US were like the main importers of people. It looked like Argentina were like one of the richest nations on earth, GDP-wise, and looked like they were going to be the dominant power here. So there's a lot up for grabs between the USA, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. You're going to assume the USA is going to dust off Mexico, and it's up to you to consolidate this area. But maybe Brazil's a bit too big for you. Maybe you're looking for something else. Something like Bolivia. So Bolivia is interesting because they start in this weird Confederate sort of state. As you can see here, the Bolivians intervened in the Peruvian Civil War of 1835, and it means that Peru has fallen under Bolivia, pretty much. You have to run for the next 10 years trying to keep everything stable and keeping your legitimacy high whilst keeping your subjects in place at the same time as everyone wants to kill you because they don't want Bolivia to survive. You do have long-term aims of forming the Federation of the Andes, but that provides a nice long-term aim for you. At the same time, if I unpause, you get other flavor events. Don't show me up now, game. Thank you. The Age of Caudillos. Caudillos. And it explains why that is. There's a power vacuum in place of the colonial government from Spain, and now you have these caudillos. The age of caudillos, which basically means that the armed forces have a lot more strength and political attraction, and you kind of try and, well, stop that from happening. Or you can continue it, I guess. It's entirely up to you. You can try and play a liberal government, or you can go straight for full military rule. It's a lot of flavor here. If I pause a little bit more, we have another event. The capture of Felipe Salavari, who obviously was involved in the Peruvian Civil War. So we can kill him, or we allow him to never return. And, well, you know, got to keep the Confederation safe after all. Anyway, so what I'm trying to point out with this is you have a lot of different flavor. It feels different from Brazil, which is what makes it fun. And you have to play around with keeping these lot loyal and keeping control of them, and then hopefully long-term forming the Andes. But it's going to be lots of little things popping up and events popping up that's going to make this a fun one. But of course, the number one fun nation is going to be Tunis. This is a subjective list. This is my favorite nation. I am half Tunisian. That's why I like it. That's it. Tunis as a state is a horrifying mess. It's really terrible to play, but I find it fun, and so I don't feel right not including it on the list. Okay, in all seriousness, you start out in the Ottoman market, so there's a lot of wrangling to do with that, and a lot of expansion opportunities defending against the French who are constantly bearing down on you. It's a fun, like, high-octane game where you're not strong enough to take from others, so you kind of have to try and become, unless you're going to try and ally France, you have to become sort of a free market state where you can import as much as possible and export as much as possible. So a very unique kind of gameplay style there that isn't unique technically to Tunis, but I play it like that, and so it's fun. Do you really think I was going to make a most fun nations in Victoria 3 video and not include Tunis? Anyway, chaps, that wraps up my recommendations for who you should be playing. Honorable mentions include Egypt and the Ottomans, although I find their mechanics to sometimes be frustrating, which takes away from the fun element of it. And realistically, once you deal with the other one, if Egypt conquers the Ottomans or Ottomans conquer the Egyptians, you basically have a free run, and it's the same as playing like France or Britain. The only reason that Austria and Prussia are on this list is for a similar thing of once you achieve your medium-term aim of forming Germany or making sure the other one is put down, that's it. You're again now too far gone. I like campaigns that have short, medium, long-term aims. The only reason I didn't do that for Ethiopia is I find Ethiopia kind of limiting in terms of import-export, but I haven't played it in a while, so I could be wrong. Ethiopia is also one to watch because you do have that initial conquest side of things. But chaps, that is where I'm going to leave it for today. If you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comments down below. Please let me know what you think your most favorite, the number one best nation to play as in Victoria 3 is for fun purposes. And I will see you all next time. Goodbye.